Today we're diving deep into one single word, a word that has built empires, drawn lines between people, and ignited arguments for centuries. That word is jizya. Now on the surface, it's a tax, but as we're about to see, it's about so much more than just money. We're talking about power, faith, and how societies are structured from the ground up.
And it all starts right here, with this one verse from the Quran. This is the foundation, the scriptural bedrock for the whole concept of jizya. I want you to pay really close attention to those words, willing submission, and feel themselves subdued. Because these phrases, they're not just descriptive. They are the very heart of a debate that has been going on for over 1,000 years. What do they actually mean in practice?
So that leads to the big question, doesn't it? What really was this tax? Was it, a fair fee for military protection in a dangerous world? Was it something much darker? A constant, humiliating reminder that you were a second-class citizen, a penalty for refusing to convert? The answer to that question changed everything for the millions of people who lived under this system.
All right, to really get to the bottom of this, we've got to start with the basics. Here's the thing you'll see right away. Even just trying to define jizya is, well, it's loaded with controversy.
So on a very basic level, here's the textbook definition. The jizya is a yearly tax paid per person by certain non-Muslims, who are known as dhimmis, living under Islamic rule. Now, it didn't apply to everyone. Women, kids, the elderly, the sick, they were usually exempt. But that's the what. The why it was collected, well, that's where the story gets really complicated.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly, the two completely opposing views. On the one hand, you have the argument that this was just a practical arrangement. Non-Muslims didn't have to serve in the army, so they paid a tax instead to help cover the cost of their protection. A fair deal, right? But then you have the other side, and it's a much, much darker interpretation. This view says the jizya was a tool of subjugation, a way to put financial and psychological pressure on people to convert to Islam.
And if you think that penalty idea sounds a little extreme, we'll just listen to this. This quote comes from Al-Marginani, a really important classical jurist. He's not mincing words. He says, point blank, that jizya is imposed in place of death. He's basically framing the tax as the direct alternative to being killed for unbelief. It's an incredibly direct and, honestly, pretty chilling way to look at it.
This hadith, a recorded saying from Islamic tradition, lays out the stakes in the starkest possible terms. For a non-Muslim community, there were three options on the table. 1. Convert to Islam. 2. Pay the jizya and live under Muslim rule. Or 3. Fight. That's it. There was no fourth door. The choice was literally a matter of life, death, and faith.
But the controversy doesn't just stop with why the tax was paid. The how the payment was actually made, is just as revealing. Remember that instruction from the Quran, to feel themselves subdued? Well, many classical scholars didn't see that as just an internal feeling. They saw it as something that had to be performed, publicly.
Just look at this breakdown from commentators like al-Zamakhshari. This was not like going to the DMV. It was a meticulously planned public ritual, and every single step was designed to show who was in charge. You had to come on foot, not on a horse. You had to stand while the tax collector sat. Then, the collector would literally grab you by the scruff of the neck, shake you, and yell, "Pay the jizya." And after you paid, you'd get slapped on the back of the neck. This was humiliation as policy. It was subjugation made physical.
And don't think this was just some abstract legal theory from a book. No, this was actually put into practice. When the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb brought back the jizya in India, the official rules for how to collect it looked a lot like this. The protocol specified that the person paying had to stand while the collector sat, and it even laid out how their hands should be positioned, one above, one below, to symbolize inferiority.
And that brings us to medieval India. This is where all those scholarly debates and religious interpretations crash into the hard, messy reality of daily life. This is where we can see the real-world impact these tax policies had on millions and millions of people. Now, it's so important to understand that the jizya usually wasn't the only tax. In India, for example, many non-Muslims also had to pay something called kharaj, which was a heavy tax on their land. When you combine those two, the financial burden could become absolutely crushing, pushing families right to the brink of survival.
And that pressure could become unbearable. This account from the time of Sultan Alauddin Khilji paints an absolutely devastating picture. It says that the tax burden got so bad that some peasants were forced to do the unthinkable. They had to sell their own wives and children just to pay what the state demanded.
And these aren't just one-off stories. We have accounts from European travelers who were in India at the time and saw this kind of thing happening. A Spanish traveler named Medrique and a French doctor, François Bernier, and this guy was the personal physician to Emperor Aurangzeb himself. They both wrote about seeing tax collectors physically take away the children of peasants who couldn't pay, to be sold as slaves.
So, you have to wonder, did people just take this lying down? Absolutely not. When Aurangzeb brought the jizya back, the historian Kafi Khan describes a massive, peaceful protest by Hindus in Delhi. They staged a sit-in right outside the palace. The response was horrific. The emperor allegedly ordered elephants and horses to be driven into the crowd. Many people were trampled to death, until finally the resistance was broken and the people agreed to pay the tax.
So what happened to the jizya? After being enforced for centuries all across the Muslim world, its story takes a pretty dramatic turn in the modern era. But as we'll see, it hasn't completely disappeared. This timeline just shows you what a long, wild ride this tax has been on. It starts way back in the 7th century. For over 1,000 years, it was a core part of Islamic empires. You see it abolished in India by the tolerant emperor Akbar, only to be brought back with a vengeance by his great-grandson Aurangzeb. Then, in the mid-1800s, the Ottoman Empire officially gets rid of it. And you'd think, okay, that's the end of the story. But then, fast forward all the way to 2015, and the terrorist group ISIS brings it back, forcing it on Christians in the territory they controlled.
The fact that a group like ISIS resurrected the jizya raises a really disturbing question. Is this concept just a historical curiosity, a relic of a time long gone, or is the ideology that justifies it still a powerful force in the world today?
At the end of the day, the story of the jizya is a stark reminder of how power, belief, and money can get tangled together to shape entire societies and decide people's fates. It forces us to ask a really big question. How do the echoes of these ancient systems still ripple through our world today? And what can they teach us about the challenges we're still facing right now?